Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 44 of my 2020 reads. This week I read quite a few things, including a number of things to wrap up my Disability Awareness Reading Month. So first, I finished Monster, She Wrote by Lisa Kröger and Melanie R. Anderson. This is a nonfiction collection of mini biographies of women who have contributed to the horror genre. Sush actually read this out loud to me, and I am so impressed. We started it in October and finished it in October. We never read that fast, mainly my fault. But we had such a fun time reading it. It was so perfect for this season, and it was just so well written. I actually have done a standalone review for this, so that will be up later this week, but I really recommend it. I think it's excellently written, really well researched, just fascinating biographies, fascinating looks at what these women have contributed. It's so good. So if you like nonfiction, if you like reading about genre, it's just excellent. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a book that I heard about from Ashley at Bookish Realm, who I will link below, and I am so glad that I heard about this because it was excellent. I actually did a standalone review for this as well, so that will also come out later this week. It is a middle grade in verse about a boy whose dad is a football player but ends up getting chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is kind of the brain trauma that happens to football players after a lot of concussions and results in memory loss and all sorts of other types of illness. It was such a beautiful book, just beautifully written, so filled with emotion. I love the topic that it discussed, just really excellent. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, highly recommend it, and I will have that review up later this week. Also, I do have another review, which I will link below, for Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming, which is another middle grade in verse that she wrote, although that one is a memoir of her own childhood. So good. She is really cementing herself as just an amazing author who I think I need to just go read all of her books, and she has an enormous backlist of books to read as well. I know that Red at the Bone, which is an adult novel that she wrote, came out this year, and I really want to get to that by the end of this year because I'm just so very much excited to read more of her work. Next, I read A Cowboy to Remember by Rebekah Weatherspoon. This is a book that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing. I will link her channel as well as the standalone review that she did for this novel below. And this was such a great contemporary romance. It's basically almost like a very loose retelling of a Cinderella story. And it is about a woman who's a celebrity chef who ends up falling and hitting her head and losing her memory, and goes back to the ranch where she grew up on to kind of convalesce. And there happens to be sort of her childhood sweetheart who she's been estranged from for quite a long time, but with her memory loss, you know, some of those hard feelings are gone and they start to develop a thing for each other. This book was really sweet. If you want a holiday romance, by the way, we're coming up on the holidays, this takes place over Christmas and it's perfect. You should definitely pick it up. I loved the way that the characters are so mature. There's so much in this book about having good communication, having respect, having boundaries, listening to what the other person says, standing up when you're not comfortable with something. There's so much in here that's just like the kind of adult interaction that I need in my romance. So I really loved that. I also just liked the kind of development of the main character and her friendship and her sort of dealing with her health issues. There's quite a lot in this about like dealing with that health issue. She's got a nurse who helps her. There's a lot of consideration given to her not being overwhelmed as she deals with new situations and new people that she can't remember, all of these things. So I really liked how all of that was done. I do think at the end there was just a little bit of a pacing issue for me where most of the book was a really nice slow burn. I liked that so much. And then just at the end, all of a sudden we had a little bit of kind of a climax that just came out of nowhere, just lots and lots of stuff happening all at once. And that was a little bit much for me. Also the romantic male lead was not so much my personal type, but even so, I just thought that this was such a great book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm definitely going to continue in the series. Next, I finished a classic, which is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a book that actually had been paused for me. I read half of it last year and I thought I need to finish this. So I finished it this year. And I think that this is a very interesting story, especially because the point of this story is so different from all of the media adaptations of it. It feels like so many of the movie adaptations completely lost the point of the book. This story is very much kind of this gothic horror that looks at a doctor, Frankenstein, who is so filled with kind of himself, with hubris, with ego, that he decides to create a creature, and then that creature he sort of abandons. So much of this story is really examining ethics and morals and the way that we support or don't support people in society. A lot of the parts of this book that were the creature himself talking about his experiences and talking about the isolation that he felt. This creature is so sensitive and so feeling. And just that abandonment and that isolation and that lack of connection to others is really the motivation for a lot of bad things that happen. And Dr. Frankenstein is just so self-centered and thinks himself morally superior, which I do not agree with. But all of that interaction was really fascinating. I love the philosophical exploration of things in this, especially the creature talking about how frustrating and heartbreaking it is for him to be judged on his physical exterior. There's a lot in this about just kind of his disfigurement and how that leads people to treat him, that folds in really nicely with a lot of the other reading that I'm doing for Disability Awareness Month. But I do think that this story is way too melodramatic for me, especially the last 25% of this just goes full-blown melodrama, which just was way over the top for me. I actually had a very hard time finishing it because of that. So even though I loved the discussion of the philosophical elements, I did not like so much of that melodrama and so much of that just over the top aspect of it. So overall, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I'm glad that I read it, but it's definitely not going down as a favorite for me. And lastly, I read Uncanny Magazine, issue number 30, Disabled People Destroy Fantasy. This is something that I was really glad to read because last year I had read Uncanny Magazine issue 24, Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction. I did a standalone review for that, so I will link it below, and I thought that that was amazing, so I really wanted to read this one as well. This one is somehow a lot shorter. It's about half the length of the science fiction one, which I think is a shame because I would have liked to hear more voices and more stories, but I did really like a lot of the contributions. There were quite a few really interesting stories, really interesting discussions. I particularly liked the short story Tower by Lane Waldman, as well as the interview with Lane Waldman done by Sandra Odell. Tower is such a great story about a girl and her mother, kind of like a Rapunzel retelling, trapped in a tower where their hair, her hair has grown so much that it kind of covers everything, and they're trapped in this tower with the hair. And it's just such a fascinating sort of analogy for depression and anxiety. And I loved the discussion in the interview with Lane Waldman about anxiety and how that affects things. So it was a great story and a great interview to also have in there. I was kind of surprised too that one of the things I loved about this collection was the poetry. Sometimes I do like poetry a lot, but sometimes my ability with poetry is not up to the kind of level of poetry that I find in these collections, but there were so many poems in here that I really liked. Eating Disorder Does Not Begin to Describe It by R.M. Lemberg was so great, as was Goddess in Forced Repose by Tamara Giray. Both of these were just filled with so much power and so much anger, and I think I really like that in my poetry. I like angry poetry. So I was surprised by how much I liked the poetry in this collection. Not everything in this collection completely worked for me, but I really did get a lot out of it, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that's everything that I read for this week. If you guys have read any of these books, or if you have any thoughts, any ideas, any recommendations, anything at all, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.